It wasn't long ago that I loved Game of Thrones. 2 years ago I was a lot more hopeful for the show, even defending some of the elements of declining quality of the past few seasons that I would later be able to look at from a more realistic perspective. Not that of a slightly confusing and sometimes weak narrative that was going to reveal itself as some incredible master plan, but as a tired, lazily written show that had lost interest in achieving narrative heights of the books in exchange for plot-armored fan favorites, unearned moments of epic, and working towards a plot that was as dumbed down as possible to make it accessible and, let's be honest, not challenging to write. Season 7 confirmed all of my worst fears and more, giving us not a resurgence of the quality of writing, but rather digging a hole so deep that there was no chance of the show ever recovering. And unfortunately, I really mean that, because even if Season 8 has well-written characters, an intelligent, coherent plot with twists and interesting surprises, it won't make any sense when placed in the context of the previous season, where the world completely stops making sense and the characters have zero resemblances to themselves from earlier seasons. So a quality Season 8 is still going to feel very inconsistent in context, like building your house on a foundation of fairy floss. It's still going to fall down. As bad as Season 7 is on the whole, there's one episode that exemplifies just about all the absolute worst aspects of the current writing, and that is Beyond the Wall. The single worst episode this show has ever had. This episode is so boring, so baffling, and not just from a writing perspective, but in terms of directing, that I just can't believe it exists in the Game of Thrones canon. Now, I don't want to tarnish the director. He's also directed some episodes of Game of Thrones which are excellent, but here I can only guess he was completely uninspired by the material and put in a bare minimum effort, because nothing in this episode even works remotely. Let's look at the main storyline of this episode, which takes up the majority of the runtime. We have 7 characters who have mostly never met on a journey together, so a bit of backstory. This is the event that the whole season has been leading up to. The first characters who gained this motivation were the Hound and the Brotherhood Without Banners in episode 1. While going north for some completely unclear reason, they go into a random house and tell the Hound to look in the fire and tell them what they see. Why this house on fire? Well, the house has a history with the Hound, but they don't know that. Otherwise, it's just a random spot. This series has a history of interesting and cryptic prophecies, often even more interesting in the book, like, for example, Melisandre's prophecy of Renly charging in and defeating Stannis at the Blackwater, which is why he considered it vital to defeat Renly before striking King's Landing. He succeeded, thinking that the prophecy had been severed, only for Garland Tyrell to charge in and defeat him wearing Renly's armor, thought by terrified soldiers to be Renly back from the dead. The books and early seasons of the show are full of fascinating and cryptic prophecies like this. What is a prophecy the Hound sees? There's a mountain, go to it. Of course, the fans thought up all the metaphors they could manage, but the real meaning of the prophecy was, there's a mountain, go to it. The prophecy in the show has basically just come down to putting a quest marker on the map. The Hound has no emotional investment in it, he just does it because he's told to. The rest of the characters came up with this genius plan in episode 5. After a series of bizarre and unfathomably stupid plans, this has to be the worst. Go north, collect a wight, and show it to Cersei. First, why not just get the Night's Watch to do it? They have trained rangers who know the land and are pledged to guard the realms of men through whatever means necessary. This is their job. Why do you need to have the King of the North, one of the most politically important figures in all of Westeros, go spend God knows how long going into the wilderness to collect it? That would be like if they sent Robert Baratheon out to Essos to find and kill Daenerys Targaryen in Season 1. Second, why do they think this would work? Cersei's not known to be a reasonable person. Why send your most important people out to possible death just to grab a zombie to show a psychopath who already has a zombie bodyguard, in the hopes that not only will it convince her that the White Walkers are marching south to kill everyone, but also that she will, care, that it will make her side with them instead of just letting them kill themselves off, so that when the world is saved she has an army thousands of times their size. And third, it's an absurd notion that she would actually pause the whole damn war just to let them carry out some harebrained scheme, and that she would assume Daenerys would do the same. This is another case of the show treating it like time just doesn't exist, that things just don't happen unless they're on screen before our eyes. Just like Daenerys Dothraki just sit in hammer space until she needs them to attack in episode 4, not raiding or eating or any damn thing. Lastly, there is literally no detail to the plan. They don't even know where they're going until the Brotherhood at Eastwatch gives them a hint, how they plan to capture it, whether it's actually going to survive going south of the wall. They don't even give us any hints over whether they're going to have dragonglass weapons from Dragonstone or not. I'll get back to that one. Now we've gotten through how absurd the premise is, we can finally get to the episode. I actually really like the first few shots showing the Westeros map table at Dragonstone where they've just been. the camera moving towards the wall and transitioning to the icy landscape beyond, is a moody and engaging way to start. But as soon as we start focusing on the characters, that excitement goes away. The open is more or less cold, just going straight to them walking through a landscape that they will not interact with in any way, and we'll continue to see them walk in a line for another 10 whole minutes. During this time, there's virtually no actual action of any kind, just 2 to 3 characters having a conversation while the others stay silent in the background. Then cut to wide shot, move to the next random group of strangers, which honestly would be okay if they were talking about anything interesting, but they're not. In Season 7, having resolved basically every storyline from the books except Daenerys' conquest and the threat of the dead, and before Season 8 when the climax will go down, the writers seem to be afraid to do anything with any real dramatic consequence at all. The complexity of the political and personal feuds between different characters in the previous seasons, all they can do now is reference it. It would not suit the story to have Gendry really be at odds with the Brotherhood because they want them to go on this quest together. So Gendry moans about the Brotherhood betraying him and how the Red God is evil, but he doesn't do anything about it. They just tell him none of that matters now. What matters is the fight against the dead. Jorah and Jon Snow talk about how Jorah was exiled for selling criminals into slavery, but does it cause any tension? Nope, they're all over it. They all hold the same view. None of that matters now. What matters is the fight against the dead. It's the same beat we hear in every meeting conversation this whole damn season. They even chicken out on Longclaw changing hands because that would, mess with the status quo. It's boring. They're too afraid to put any actual drama in the show because they don't know how to deal with the complexity of human emotion, so they just get everyone's personality towards serving the plot. Jorah and Thoros talk about the Siege of Pike. Tormund bugs the Hound about the pointless non-plot of his crush on Brienne, which was literally just made because he made a funny face and they thought it was funny, so they just went with it. None of these conversations have any effect on the characters or plot, except perhaps for making sure the viewer knows they're over what interesting conflicts they might have had and unified in the purpose of collecting some bag of bones to show to a psychopath in the hopes that she'll stop warring against them. Eventually, something happens. A blizzard starts and a polar bear is spotted in the background, prompting one of the cringiest lines of the season.
The bears have blue eyes.
It's now that we realize it's a white polar bear.
What we had to go through to get the zombie polar bear was writing the zombie polar bear into every season for about 4 seasons.
We thought they'd be so excited to do a zombie bear.
And the visual effects guys tell us in the nicest possible way, fuck you. We cannot afford a zombie polar bear. God damn it, we want a zombie polar bear.
I know that this has been covered, but it's ridiculous that they just made Ghost, whose connection to Jon is meant to be even deeper and more meaningful than Daenerys' connection with the dragons, disappear without any explanations due to budgetary constraints, but they find the time for a CGI white polar bear. Really shows where the priority is with the creators in this show. And not only does this fight with the white polar bear add absolutely nothing to the story, apart from Beric dying, which could have easily happened from the whites later as he's still alive at that point, but it's also terribly structured. If you watch the behind the scenes of this episode, you can see all the incredible effort that went into training the stunt people for this scene and all the incredible special effects, and all I can think about is what an absolute waste. A random Night's Watchman, naturally never given a name or an introduction, sees the bear in the distance, start to head for him, only for the bear to come at him from completely side on. Literally seconds ago, it was like 50 meters away, and in seconds, it not only runs the distance, but also goes to the right of him far enough to be obscured by the blizzard, and in front of him enough that he has to catch up with it. And then the bear, which apparently has the ability to make absolutely no sound at all except when attacking people, shows up from the complete opposite side of the group behind Jon, who is facing the last guy the bear attacked, with another nameless red shirt in its mouth. Then, even though he was running right in front of the bear, after a pointless cut to almost the exact same camera position, Jon Snow runs up from behind and slashes at the bear, and Beric and Thoros, the only people in this whole expedition who thought that fire, the thing that famously kills whites, might be useful, enter the fray. After unnamed Redshirt 2 is killed because nobody is helping him, Beric manages to slash at the bear, easily setting it on fire, but seemingly not affecting it at all otherwise. It then goes for the Hound, and Thoros gets his blade lodged in its jaw trying to fend it off. We then spend an unusual amount of time watching the Hound hesitate, as if he has some emotional connection to Thoros, or as if we haven't seen that he's afraid of fire before. Shocking. Meanwhile, what's everyone doing? Gendry, Jorah, Tormund, they've all just been standing around doing shit all. Not to mention the other disposables. Tormund manages a singular attack, and when he's knocked away, all 5 characters who aren't paralyzed or tied up completely ignore Thoros for like 15 seconds until Jorah shows up and taps it on the skull, which obviously kills it instantly. Now, it's never been established that they have dragonglass weapons at all. We might assume they should, and if you pixel peep you might be able to see that some of them appear to have them, but in an episode with 25 minutes wasted on pointless conversation, couldn't we have had one line or one close-up to show that they're actually preparing to fight the undead? But again, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we've ever seen any evidence that dragonglass can kill wights, only white walkers. As far as our protagonist should be aware, the only way to kill wights is with fire, and only white walkers or others are weak to dragonglass. And here we have a white bear that's burning for pretty much a full minute and attacked by several weapons completely unaffected, only for a single stab from the dagger to make it fall instantly, like a goddamn video boss when you hit its last health point. Who choreographed this god-awful fight? This is the thing that D&D were fighting to have in the show since Season 2, and it was executed terribly. It took me half a dozen rewatches to even get a good idea of the layout, as the camera angles are so poorly thought out in an environment where you cannot see anything, and you can barely tell what character you're looking at. It makes it really difficult to tell what's going on at all, hardly helps the viewer engage with the material. It's just directed and shot in the most dull, confusing way possible. Anyway, after more pointless talking, because Thoros' injury doesn't seem to change the stakes or mood at all, we see the regular looking mountain from the Hound's mysterious and intriguing vision, so that's fulfilled I guess, and we finally catch up with a small group of White Walkers. A battle ensues, and in another disappointing, lazy writing twist, we see that the Whites are basically just the droids from the Phantom Menace or the alien invaders from the Avengers, all shutting down as soon as their mothership is deactivated, or in this case a White Walker. Oh, except for the one that they need to capture, conveniently, which is for no particular reason the only one traveling with this White Walker who was not turned by him. After restraining the White, the team are caught by a large swarm of Whites who chase them. For no particular reason, John decides that Gendry is the fastest, despite having barely met him. And inexplicably, Gendry manages to escape the Whites with ease, and none of them decide to follow him. The rest get run into the frozen lake, where they're saved because the Whites fall into the water and they can't swim. Or can they? John says in the next episode that the Whites can't swim, and the only reason he would think this is because of what happens in this episode. I mean, the way it's presented, it seems as if the Whites straight up die underwater. They couldn't make these guys feel more like video game enemies if they tried, could they? And if they didn't die, swimming or not, they could walk along the bottom of the lake and come up in the middle where the A-team is standing. But then at the end of the episode, the Whites managed to attach these giant chains to the dragon at the bottom of the lake, for which they would need to at least be able to survive. From a logical perspective, I see no reason why they shouldn't be able to swim if they have a decent amount of flesh on them to let them push through the water, but then even if they can't, then waiting for the lake to refreeze doesn't make any sense. If they can survive in water at all, there's no reason to wait. And on that note, the White Walkers bring the cold. We always see frost appear on things when they're nearby, and the Night King's presence puts out the fire later in the episode, so could they not freeze it? But wait, I know what you're saying. It was all a trap to get Daenerys to come with her dragon, and to that I say, give me a minute, there's like so much stuff in this episode that's complete garbage, I gotta get through some of that first. So anyway, while Gendry runs entire landscapes to the wall, sends a raven 1500 miles to Dragonstone based on the stated length of the wall, and Daenerys flies back on a dragon, the band of brothers have what I can best guess is one night on the rock. A lot has been said about the travel times in Game of Thrones, and I really don't think you could argue that this all happening in a night makes any sense. You could argue that maybe they were waiting for a couple of days, which still feels like an implausible time frame for all these things to happen, but there's more to the issue than that. People say that time is compressed in this show, and cite that this even happened in Season 1, with the journey to Winterfell happening over the course of one episode. Now firstly, let's point out that this happened over a full episode, not about 10 minutes screen time twice. But what matters here is the impact of that time and how it's presented, and how it affects the plot. When we follow Robert and Ned to King's Landing, or even Catelyn, whose timeline doesn't necessarily sync up with the others, we were only following a small group of parties in Westeros, and the world was in a time of peace. Nobody watches episode 3 and worries about how much time it took, because it wouldn't affect any other story. On the other hand, this sequence of events is set firstly during a war with the villain of the show, and pretty much only the characters involved in this sequence directly. And secondly, while most of the heroes are stuck on a refreezing lake with no supplies, surrounded by villains waiting for the opportunity to strike, in the middle of a freezing winter in the coldest region of the map. So why does it feel like time means nothing here? This is exactly the type of scenario that makes viewers ask all these questions, but the writers just do not seem to care in the slightest. And neither does the director for that matter. There's very little effort to indicate to us how much time has passed as the actors stand around in the middle of the lake. Everyone has a blank expression for the entire scene. I mean, they just stand there looking around as if they've literally just arrived. Nobody's chatting, nobody's looking uneasy. The Hound is the only one who shows any sign of boredom. And why do they look so comfortable? Shouldn't they be shivering, frostbitten, suffering? You want to make us feel like the stakes are high, right? Show that rations are low. Show the misery in their expressions and movements. Why do they look like they're just waiting in line for 30 seconds while the person in front fiddles with coins to pay for their shopping? Whether a day has passed, or 3, or a week, it feels like 5 minutes. This also invites the question again of why they did this ridiculous plan when it probably would have been so much easier to just have Daenerys take 5 minutes to swoop in on a dragon and pick up a wight that was relatively unguarded, and be home in time for afternoon tea, or at least fly them to the wall and wait there in case they need help, which would have been far less time wasteful than the boat trip. Anyway, Thoros dies, nobody really seems to care that much, and we as an audience don't care because we've barely seen him since season 3 and he doesn't appear concerned with his own life. All I was thinking was, why did they keep him around after the bear attack just for him to die the same way anyway? The only interesting thing in this scene is a discussion about whether they can kill the White Walkers to get rid of the Whites, which Jon seems completely opposed to. What is his reason for this? Because it might kill the White they captured. Apparently, this is more important than not dying. And also, can't they just capture a different White? Beric suggests killing the Night King as he turned them all, and killing him would end things immediately. To which Jon replies,
You don't understand.
What don't we understand, Jon? Beric is right. By this show's logic, that would kill them all. What don't you understand? You don't understand that they need to stretch this out for another season? Alright, you waited patiently, now I'll address the trap theory. So, the Hound, showing some sort of boredom, grabs a rock and throws it at a White, and then throws another, which bounces off the now refrozen lake, alerting the White that is now frozen enough to cross, causing them all to start attacking. I don't really have much to say about this fight before the dragon shows up. It's pretty boring. Watching our invincible heroes mow down mindless drone after mindless drone. Occasionally one gets almost killed, but we know they're never in any real danger. Now, some people have said that since the Whites attach the chain underwater and the Night King makes no attempt to kill them with his javelins or do anything at all until just before Daenerys arrives, it must have been a trap. The Night King has psychic powers and lured them all there to capture a dragon. Well, firstly, introducing psychic powers that can work with that level of accuracy brings up questions similar to those that we have with Bran. Like, why is this power useful for this situation, but not this situation? Couldn't this have been solved with psychic powers? If Bran knows what Baelish has done, why does he wait? Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. The other thing is that if not for a couple of plot holes which make no sense that it was by chance, there would be no reason to assume that it was a trap, because the Night King's plan would be both an inefficient plan and rely on a lot of unnecessarily making it look like coincidence. All the pretense required would be to allow Gendry to accidentally escape, and then they could capture the heroes anywhere and capture them in whatever way they see fit. Instead, they have to let them prepare themselves on an island while the totally capable of swimming Whites chill out patiently at the bottom of the lake pretending to be dead. And they had to somehow know that Daenerys would arrive a few minutes after the Hound randomly decided to prove that the lake was frozen over, giving them enough time to fight them without actually killing them, so that Daenerys will see and drop down to get a dragon skewered. Then, despite this being a genius master plan, we have to assume that the Night King would not ready every walker with a javelin ready to kill every dragon in the quickest time possible. Oh wait, they do all have javelins. Yet by the time the dragons show up, I guess we're meant to simply forget that? So then we must assume that instead of them all aiming their javelins at the dragon, the Night King would only want to throw the javelin himself by slowly walking up to the dragon everyone is escaping on, and then throw it at a completely different dragon much further away and faster that is helping nobody. Honestly, I seriously cannot believe they actually shot that like that. That nobody throughout the whole writing, storyboarding, and shooting process realized how monumentally nonsensical and tension deflating this was. I think the Night King must have gone to the Season 7 Littlefinger School of Evil Schemes. Rely on coincidence? Check. Not achieve nearly as much as you could have and have low ambitions? Check. Make no sense? Check. Season 7 was the absolute laziest with its choice of deaths. In order to simplify their story down to its most boring bare bones, the writers killed off any character who wasn't in direct and solitary allegiance to one of the 3 lead characters in Season 6. And for Season 7, they're too scared to kill off any of their remaining favourites because it would be challenging to write. So instead, we lose some Tarly boys with 0 development, Thoros, who nobody cares about, a dragon who is just a reptile that acts like a reptile, and Littlefinger, who was one of the most important characters on the show, until they removed not only his intelligent behavior, but also any relevance he had to the stakes of the series and the main storyline. And that's what makes this episode so depressingly unexciting. There's never any sense of stakes. Not when Jon starts inexplicably heading away from Drogon when they're all trying to escape, not when he gets pulled underwater, and not when he miraculously comes up and is seen again by the wights trying to escape. In Season 7, this has become a regular occurrence. A Deus Ex Machina is always waiting for our main character. It's not their actions, their choices, or the situations they end up that decide whether they die or not. It's whether the writers want them to die or not. It's a perfect example of plot armor. When Jon is dragged under icy cold water for almost a minute, either that should be the end of him, or someone else should have to make an important decision to save him. Life or death situations like this ought to be used to develop character or plot. Take Brienne in the bear pit, for instance. She seems doomed, but then Jaime makes a self-sacrificing decision to risk his life, reputation, and relationships to save her, marking a huge change in his character. Imagine if she just defeated the bear by some coincidental miracle and was set free, and this point was never mentioned again. It would feel like the writers just fabricated the whole situation purely to create an artificial threat. Maybe you could even get away with that once, but when it happens almost every episode, it becomes extremely predictable. In this episode, it happens half a dozen times, and several to Jon Snow in a very short period. You could maybe count Benjen as an exception, except that there was zero foreshadowing to this. Perhaps if we'd recently got some idea of Benjen's whereabouts or a suggestion that he might care at an earlier point in the season, but we never get any of that, and we never will, as he's now dead again for purely nonsensical plot reasons. There was plenty of room on that horse. The fact that he did several of these Deus Ex Machinas in a row makes it all the worse. What if this was simplified to having Jon drowning and Benjen appearing under the lake, mysterious, undead, and eerie, and he saves Jon, then, I don't know, just as he puts Jon on the horse, maybe the Night King touches him and turns him, so that the last thing a half-conscious Jon sees is his uncle saving him and then his eyes turning the bright blue of the enemy. At least that would add something to the story. It would make the enemy seem somewhat more personal. Doesn't that sound more compelling and efficient? I mean, I know that's not perfect, it needs work, but that's what a writer's room is for. Something that D&D seem to have forsaken entirely. Again, Jon looks doomed, but somehow his horse walks all the way back to Eastwatch with a soaking wet man suffering from hypothermia and half dead, and he recovers pretty much fully by the time he's on the ship back to Dragonstone. After the first half of the episode doing a pretty good job of making it look like a long journey, the second half really did a fantastic job at making it feel like they were only walking for 20 minutes. And finally, in the boat, Jon and Daenerys just randomly decide that they love each other. This relationship has been incredibly weakly developed, but we all saw it coming. It's the two big lead heroes. They have to get together, right? Okay, whatever. So of course, now he's in love, Jon decides to make the stupidest move ever and pledge allegiance to Daenerys even though she literally just said that she would help him regardless, which is sure to piss off everyone in the North. But you know they're going to spend about 20 seconds on that before it's dismissed as irrelevant anyway. Okay, is that it? Oh wait, Arya and Sansa had a terrible plot this episode too. So in the first of the few segments of this episode not set north of the Wall, Arya confronts Sansa over the note that Baelish planted for her to find in the previous episode. All it is the note which Sansa wrote in Season 1, which was very obviously dictated to her under duress. Arya is apparently so easily manipulated and so high and mighty that she actually thinks Sansa did anything other than the only thing she could have done. It was literally obey or die. Arya compares Sansa to Lyanna Mormont herself, saying that being a child is not an excuse. Lyanna has never been in a situation remotely similar, and Arya literally served Tywin at Harrenhal. Arya was willing to compromise and serve the Lannisters to survive. Not only that, but she was literally granted the opportunity to kill 3 of them and wasted every death on nobodies. That is so much worse than what Sansa did. Sansa, in return, gets extremely snobbish purely because we have to manufacture tension out of this non-issue. Nobody is going to judge Sansa for this letter. The threat is non-existent. Sansa even points out in the next scene that she has been married to 2 of her house's enemies. If the Northern Lords don't find that an insurmountable issue, why would this letter be any shock? Sansa then mysteriously goes to Littlefinger even though he's repeatedly spoken openly about his evil ambitions to her. There's no reason she would be taking his counsel. Littlefinger points out that if either Sansa or Arya decided to hurt each other, Brienne would be honor bound to intervene thanks to her pledge to Catelyn. So naturally, in the next scene, Sansa tells Brienne she has to go to King's Landing and take Podrick with her as well. I'm sorry, but why? It's almost as if the writers think that Littlefinger's statement would naturally lead Sansa to want to do this, but it should be the exact opposite. She would want Brienne to be there to protect her from Arya, right? Am I going crazy? Are they actually trying to suggest that Sansa wants Brienne gone so that she is able to hurt Arya? So that the Lady Sansa can kill her super assassin sister? But she would obviously never do that, so why? Why would she want to get rid of her best bodyguard? There's any number of envoys she could have sent to King's Landing, that is if there's even any need to send an envoy south. The scene really makes it seem as if this is specifically an excuse to get Brienne out. And aren't we all shocked when this comes back to bite her immediately? Sansa is in Arya's quarters and finds her bag of faces and sees what Arya is capable of. Sansa warns her that she has many men loyal to her, which is true, but also she just told the character who we were just reminded was the most loyal protector she had, her primary bodyguard, to go away for a long time. And instead of just explaining that she's an assassin, maybe explain how she's using the faces to defeat the enemies of the Starks, Arya, for some reason, feels the need to start creeping Sansa out and threatening her with her Game of Faces routine. Then starts pointing a knife at her and threatening to cut off her face. What? Why? None of this makes any sense. Then, at the end, she just flips the dagger around and gives it to Sansa. Now, I guess this could either be her just finishing off the thread and saying, I'm not going to do this now, but you know that I could at any time. Either that, or it's meant to be hinting to her to kill Baelish, which if that's the case, I don't know why she needed to proceed with that whole thing about wearing Sansa's face pointing a knife at her. In the next episode, Arya and Sansa have decided, off screen I suppose, that they're going to kill Baelish through a mock trial, and some have suggested that this entire episode was an act to hide that plan. But an act for whom? For Baelish? Are they supposedly under the impression that he's hiding in every single room they're in? Is he under the bed? Why would they need this deception in order to put him on trial? Why not simply pretend things are going on as normal? What was the point of getting rid of Brienne? No, this wasn't a red herring for Baelish, nor anyone else in the show. It was a red herring for the audience. They were acting antagonistic to each other in a way that makes zero sense so that the audience would be misled. It's so transparent, so forced, and so inauthentic to their characters. It may be the worst part of an entirely horrid episode. Okay, that's about it. This video is insanely long, and I'm sure that the defenders of this episode will tell me how nitpicky I'm being, but honestly, the majority of this stuff is foundational issues. It would be forgivable if there were a few stupid things in an episode or a few boring scenes, but this is simply omnipresent, and worse, it reflects the direction of the show as a whole since they started diverging drastically from the books, but never more so than in Season 7. I just don't recognize these characters anymore. Everyone's motivation is nonsense and shifts moment to moment. It never leads to any compelling drama, and the logical consistency and narrative structure of the show is just so fundamentally broken that it's impossible to get any idea of stakes. And I really don't want to hear about the fact that there are dragons and zombies in this show from people who don't understand the difference between fantasy elements and a lack of internal logic. I was so monumentally disappointed this season, and it's broken the tension and drama of the show so badly that I don't see how it can ever possibly recover. I will probably watch the next season out of morbid curiosity. I don't expect it to be as bad as Season 7, as being the last season they may have the guts to actually do something significant to affect the plot and characters, and I am kind of interested in seeing the pure spectacle of the big battle sequence, if they can pull off something on the level of Battle of the Bastards visually, but I really don't believe it can ever be a good show again. It's a sad state of affairs, and unfortunately an issue that plagues television shows all too often. Seasonal rot seems to be almost a universal issue, which is the main reason I didn't start watching Game of Thrones sooner. Being based on a book series and starting off fantastic, I really thought that Game of Thrones might have escaped that trap, but sadly it did not. Falling out of love with Game of Thrones was a sad experience, but on the other hand, it did introduce me to the books, which I came to love even up to the latest one, and I still love seasons 1 to 4 and parts of 5 and 6. So really, I don't regret watching this series. It saddened me greatly to see what it has become, but I still have the books and many episodes of great TV to look upon with a smile, a reminder of how great fantasy fiction can really be.